and now, confusingly, my little brain, we are joined by two fantastic speakers, Liza Vallance, who is the Artistic Director of Studio 3 Arts, and Kathi Leahy, who is Associate Producer and Associate Artistic Director of Imaginarium Productions. And they both have extensive knowledge and experience working in this particular field. I'm going to pass straight over to Liza. Over to you.
Thank you, Paul. Good morning. So a visual description of me. I'm a 43-year-old spectacle-wearing woman with bright red, messy, curly hair and a black and white stripy top. And I'm sitting in my shed. So the background is, as you can imagine, a shed to be with a bit of a bike and a yoga mat and some weights and other things in the background. So thank you for having me. It's very nice to be here as a non-Cov person, joining the Cov squad just for today. So as Paul mentioned, I'm Liza. I'm Artistic Director and Chief Executive of Studio 3 Arts, and we are a socially engaged arts practice based in Barking and Dagenham in East London, although clearly by my accent, if you can hear me, I'm not from Barking and Dagenham. I'm from South Wales originally. So I'm going to tell you a bit about me and how I ended up in this whole world, and then I'll impart what I hope might be some useful observations and battle scars that I've gained along the 10,000 years of working in a sort of community setting, specifically with people from lower economic backgrounds. So I wanted to talk to you today about the day I had my first doner kebab and why this kebab was part of my decision to do the job I do today, and why I specialise in working with communities from low economic backgrounds. So I grew up in the South Wales valleys. My parents didn't have any money, really at all. We were quite poor. I was the eldest of 3 kids. I was the gobby one, very dramatic, and I loved performing, well, showing off really, and nothing's changed, to be fair. So my dad worked for the coal industry. So when the national miners' strike happened in 1984, my dad didn't go to work. So things got tougher for my family and for lots of families where I grew up. So there was loads of support for the families of the striking miners. We had a food parcel every week that we queued for. I feel like I was an early adopter of food banks. And I remember getting the best Christmas presents that year that I'd ever had, right? Because the unions and all the supporters of the strike were kind of helping out the families, right? And this is where the kebab comes in. So the union had put on this Turkish night, right, for the striking miners and their families. I don't know why they thought that was the most appropriate thing to do, but we had this Turkish party night. So we're in the local sports centre in Aberdare, where I'm from, hundreds of us, right, sitting at trestle tables in rows. And then someone puts this plate of greyish meat and a bread envelope and some vegetables down on the table in front of me, right, and it tasted lush. And then when I look up at the end of the room, there was belly dancers. It was like an out-of-body experience, right? It was like someone had opened my eyes to another world with lush food, dancing and sequins. And in that moment, I wanted to know I could be amongst this kind of thing every day. And my second thought was, is this how rich people eat all the time? And as I grew up in that place, I quickly realized that, like, where you come from, how much money you've got, and how well connected you are has a real impact on your social and cultural mobility. And this made me really angry. So as I grew up, I got more and more politicized. I was excluded from school 4 times for organizing protests and petitions. And in my finest moment, a mass walkout of every student in the school down onto the rugby pitch, because I wanted us to have summer uniforms like they had on Home and Away. Remember Home and Away? Yeah. So injustice like burned me, right? And it motivated me to do my own work, stay woke. And in the end, the school had to make me head girl because it was easier to work with me than it was against me. So then my parents remortgaged their house so I could go to university. So that was, you know, no pressure. And I studied drama and English with an idea to try and find a job in the arts where I could combine my love of showing off with my grand plan to make sure that the best opportunities in the arts and culture sector was available to everyone, regardless of where you're from or how much money you've got. So there I am, I suppose, talking to you today about my practice in this field and how I've used my own kind of life experience and my personal vantage point on the world to try and redress some of those imbalances. So the organisation that I run, Studio 3 Arts, we've worked in East London for best part of 35 years. Clearly, I'm far too young to have set it up. Creating opportunities for local people to be inspired and to be supported, to be involved in the arts as audiences, producers, artists, performers, stage managers, curators, enthusiasts. We don't just like talk the talk about involving people. We eat it for breakfast, lunch and dinner. Like we model it at every strategic and operational level in the organization. So in summary, I suppose, the kebab taught me quite a few important things and sort of gave me a job in a funny kind of, kebab gave me a job. That's a sentence you don't get to say very often. So the kebab taught me that like new experiences are strange and exciting, but they're worth pursuing. It taught me that shared experiences help grow networks and galvanize communities. And it taught me that a world that you think might not be for you can be accessed with the right passport and language. And I now know the bread envelopes are called pitta. So that's a kind of basic introduction to me and kind of how I find myself here today in this room. So everything that I do as an artist is about making sure that people from lower economic backgrounds can access the stuff that their peers from posher bits of town can access. That's the basic premise of my work. And I do that in lots of different ways. And the ways that I do that are not reliant on me having the muscle of an organization behind me, or they're not reliant on me needing a venue. They're about being a human being, like, and actually connecting with the very core of what it takes to step over the threshold into a new gaff. So I don't know about you, but if I meet my mates in the pub, I make them meet me outside because I hate that thing of walking in by myself. I hate it. I hate the thought that I don't know where they're sitting. I might not be able to find them. I might not know where the toilets are. I don't know if they will have ordered me a drink already and then I'll order another one and then I'll have two and I'll look like a knobhead. I hate that feeling of the unknown, right? And so I kind of transpose that into the work that I do with people from sort of lower economic backgrounds. And the reason I say that is because very often there is a correlation between coming from economic disadvantage and having low levels of cultural confidence, right? So if you don't know the rules of a certain place, if you don't know the rules of that place, it's scary, isn't it? It's scary to kind of step over the threshold into a place. So for me, my personal one, I'm terrified of the Barbican. I'm terrified of the Barbican. I don't know where the toilets are. And I don't know how they can charge £7 for a sandwich. I'm terrified of it. And so loads of the work I do is about building cultural confidence, right? And about enabling people to kind of recognize that that space is rightfully theirs. So there are lots of kind of tricks that we can use to kind of facilitate that and kind of trigger that. So how can you develop this? Think about your practice as artists and producers, wherever you are, and what can your role be in terms of facilitating cultural confidence with the people that you want to come and see your work? Because they ain't coming unless they're confident to do so. So what are the ways in which you can kind of reduce some of the anxiety about stepping over the threshold? And that doesn't need to be a threshold in the physical sense, but it also is a kind of emotional and psychological threshold, taking that step for the first time. Imposter syndrome affects audiences as well as the makers of the work. Do you know what I mean? I'm sure that as makers of work, we've all had that thing where about a week before the thing, we don't want anyone to come. Do you know that thing where you go, I hope we haven't sold any tickets because I don't want anyone to come. And then 2 days later, you're like, actually, I want everyone to come. What am I talking about? But that feeling affects audiences as well, particularly audiences from low economic background. And there's some reasons for that.
Sorry, Liza. I'm just going to interrupt and just swap with Erin. Thank you.
Cool, thank you. So imposter syndrome affects audiences from a lower economic background more than others. And some of the reasons for that will be pretty obvious to you. First of all, if buying a ticket has a direct impact upon how much money you can put on your gas key for that week, you've got to really, really, really want to go and see that thing. If you are deciding between whether it's new shoes for your kid or a cultural experience, that's huge. That's huge. So as artists, we've got to make sure that we're doing everything we can to justify that expense. So reducing barriers for people from economic disadvantage isn't just about making things cheap, because that's quite reductive and kind of looks at this in a sort of quite linear sense. It's about making sure that the experience is top draw, is banging on every level. So have a think about in your practice what that might mean. What are the add-ons? What are the ways that you can add things to your practice, change your practice that might mean that this is the best night out for someone from an economically disadvantaged background? I hate that term. It's a bit of a long one, isn't it? But we all know what we're talking about. So a couple of the ways that we've done that, which might be something for you to reflect on. So at Studio 3 Arts, we hosted Payne's Plough Theatre Company, and they were touring a piece of theatre that you might have seen called Pop Music. And it's a fantastic play, and it's about the two people lost on the dance floor at a wedding. You know them people. It's about those people. So what we decided to do to make sure that it was as the maximum kind of value for money that we could, we put a pop quiz on before the show, and we put karaoke on after the show. It didn't cost me nothing. It didn't cost me nothing. I downloaded a pop quiz off of Google, and I found a playlist on YouTube. And everyone came an hour early, and they stayed 2 hours after the show. For no more money than the cost of the ticket. But what it meant was we were able to build relationships with those people and really maximize the fact that they had chosen to spend their small bit of disposable income with us that night. And that went a really long way in terms of kind of maintaining relationships with those people and seeing them return as bookers. So, you know, that might be something to think about. What are the add-ons? What can be done before the thing? What can be done after the thing? How do I maintain a relationship with my bookers, my visitors to my gallery, whatever it is, that means that they're getting something beyond the cost of the ticket? So that brings me on, I think, really to this concept of programming for people from economic disadvantaged backgrounds. And lots of the conversations I hear is, oh, no one came. You know, we put on something at 4 o'clock on a Tuesday and no one came. And rather than looking in the mirror and analysing why nobody came, we just assumed that nobody wanted to come. So programming and all of the stuff kind of around programming is essential if we mean what we say and we really do want to include people for whom money is tight. So it sounds almost too basic to say it, but things like the time of day that things are happening on, the venue the things are taking place in, the expectation on already have an understanding of Renaissance art, whatever it is, those things are going to have an impact on whether people who are pushed for time and pushed for money are going to invest in the thing. So the best way to mitigate that is to ask people. What's the best time for this to take place? Where's the best place for this to happen? It sounds dead obvious, but the amount of times that doesn't happen and then leads to actually a not very embedded project, it's really frustrating. So how much of your practice in that sense are you prepared to let people into? Is this about you? Is it about community? Where is your kind of non-negotiable around how much you're prepared to let in and what you're not? And how can you involve local people in your practice as early as possible so that they've already built a sense of investment in your work by the time your thing opens. So are there ways that you could create a curation committee around your work? Do you want to get local people's stories at the center of your programming? What are the simple ways that you can already reach out to people in advance of the thing that means that your practice is inclusive? And on that subject of inclusivity, the idea of looking at economic disadvantage in a bubble is a bit problematic, because generally what we know about barriers to arts participation is they're intersectional. So we need to understand what else does economic disadvantage bring, and how else can we mitigate against that. So that will be things like adverse childhood experiences highly correlate with people from economic disadvantaged backgrounds, low educational outcomes, geography, as in, you know, if you live on, certainly in an urban area like East London, estates are really cut off often from the rest of the borough. Young people can't travel because they might get killed. So what are the other kind of intersectional barriers that need to be sort of interrogated to make sure that people with less money than others are able to access your work as confidently as everything else? And we've got to, therefore, in that sense, make sure that we're not seeing people with less money as somehow being in deficit, because that feels like we're sort of edging into kind of poverty tourism, and we're edging into we've got something that they need and they should be grateful to us vibes. And that is egg on toast, super cringe. So that is a really key thing to be reflecting on in your practice, is like, we aren't missionaries. We're not trying to save people with less money. And again, it sounds quite basic, but the amount of work that you see that is highly patronizing in the way that it's trying to reach people with less money is cringy. So it's definitely something to think about. So that's not the lens through which we should be looking at anybody, but it is a lens through which we should be interrogating whether our work reaches people. There's a slight difference to me. So an example that I'd like to share with you of how I've kind of tackled this stuff. A few years ago, I was commissioned by the Barbican to make a play for their second space, not the big one, they wouldn't have me in the big one, but the second space called The Pit. And I'd been making a piece of theatre I was kind of nerdling with called Meat Raffle, which is about working men's clubs, the working class cultural sort of forms around working men's clubs. So I grew up in that kind of culture. So I'd made this play and it was good. It was really good. And it had a cast of people from Barking and Dagenham, who by default largely are economically disadvantaged. And we went to the Barbican to put it on. One man in the cast, 55-year-old boiler engineer, couldn't step onto the stage. Couldn't physically, could not step onto the stage because it wasn't for him. He had this massive thing and he had to go and sit in the pub for a couple of hours whilst he kind of talked himself into coming back in and trying again. And this went on for about the first 3 or 4 rehearsals that we did in the space. I did nothing about it. I let him do his thing at his own time. He didn't need the attention of the rest of the company on him. So we just left that thing nerdle in a corner. But then there were other things that working at the Barbican brought up. As I said earlier, £7 for a sandwich. It's £7 odd for a glass of wine. And that's eminently the price point that they need to set for the majority of their audiences. I'm not here to judge that. But what it means is, for somebody coming from Barking and Dagenham, it's a bloody expensive night out. The Barbican set the price point for the tickets for my show at £20. So you got your train ticket, you got your £20 ticket, and then you might want to have a glass of wine. There's no change out of £40 for coming to see a show about working class people. I can't fly, can it? I can't fly. So I went back to the Barbican and sort of had to say, thank you very much for the kind offer of us doing the show, but we can't really do it because I can't expect people to pay for £40. So in the end, the tickets were £5, and I harked back to my head girl protesting days and made them bring in cheaper wine and beer so that all the drinks were £3 at the Barbican for the weekend of my show. And I don't think I'll ever be invited back, but I think that was more important than actually letting them, you know, letting the ticket for this kind of event be £20. And I totally understood why they had to do that, because they had all sorts of overheads riding against my show. They didn't know how many tickets we would sell. We sold out for the entire run, but they didn't know that. They were taking a risk on us in the first place. But what was really important was, as a result of that, the Barbican really reflected on what they'd learned in working with us. And I thought that was super valuable. And they reflected on needing to work more closely with organisations that represent working class people when they're doing working class programming. So me sticking my neck out and being really kind of clear about where my kind of moral compass was around this piece of work actually led to quite an important kind of systemic change for the Barbican. It was horrible and I hated having to be that guy, but that's what you've got to do. So another example, which is very different to share with you, is that what I recognize for people without much money, when they come to my place, they've made a really important decision to come. They've made a really, really important decision. So what I will try and do is make sure that everything they could possibly need that day is available at my event, whether that's an event in a shopping centre, whether that's in a venue, a more traditional kind of arts venue, whether it's in a GP surgery, whatever it is. I will try and do everything I can by talking to loads of partners locally to make sure that everything they possibly need is there that day. So in recent examples, I put on an event for young people. It was like a hip hop dance battle. I got the local sexual health clinic to do chlamydia screening in the toilets. I got a food bank to come and chat to the parents. I got local providers to help me make up activity packs to take so the young people had stuff to take home. So what it meant was, by coming, there was a really sort of holistic experience for the young people. You know, there were people asking them to pee in cups in the toilet, but these are the sort of young people that were never going to actively turn up at a sexual health clinic. But if you bring the sexual health clinic to them, they're likely to engage in it, right? So, and again, like, it didn't cost me cash money, it cost me time. But what it meant was that I knew that those people were getting a really grounded experience, and cultural provision became part of their everyday. We sort of removed that kind of mystique around, oh, I'm going to the theatre, or I'm going to do an art thing. It was just, I'm going to go and do this community thing. So it is worth thinking about, where are those opportunities in your networks where you might be able to kind of add holistic value to something you're doing that doesn't in any way impinge upon the artistic quality of what you're making, but it means it's easier and more comfy for people to be able to connect with it. Does that sort of make sense? This is sort of odd thing thinking of chlamydia screening at an arts event, but it had a real sort of impact. The thing that I'm concerned about almost more than the artistic experience itself is the concept of welcome. It's this concept of welcome, right? This thing I was talking about earlier about the threshold. If we get that wrong, we've not just screwed it for our project, we might have screwed it for that person ever engaging with arts and culture again. You know what I mean? So if they turn up and they don't know where the toilets are, there's no one to greet them, or the art feels difficult to understand, or they can't see somebody that looks like them represented in the space, in the work, in the concept, they might never come back. And to me, that feels like an enormous responsibility. But it's the one that, if we are serious about working with people with less money than others, is the one we've got to take the most seriously. And I do that in some overt and some covert ways in my practice. I employ mystery shoppers to turn up to our stuff, turn up to my stuff, and just reflect on what the experience was like. Did somebody greet you? Was it confusing? Did you know what was going on? Did it feel like value for money? So I've got almost a kind of mystery shopper's matrix that I apply against all of the work that I make. to make sure that it's doing that thing, to make sure that it's completely resonant and relevant for audiences from economically disadvantaged backgrounds. And it really works. It really works because we can get right under the skin of the experience. It's not about what's going on. It's not about the art. It's about everything around the art. So I do that quite a lot. So I suppose what I'm trying to say is, this stuff is not just available to you if you've got a venue, if you've got big arts resources. It's the kind of psychological concepts here that can be applied to your practice, but they need to be thought of, I suppose, really early in the process. So the big questions for me are, is about how you describe your work. So if your work is described in language that requires an MA in fine art to understand it, then guess who's coming to see your show? People with an MA in fine art. Like, so there's stuff about how we describe our work. At that point, we have made an intention as to who we want in the audience. So we've got to think about that early doors.
Just swap over interpreters again, if that's okay.
Sure.
Thank you.
Cool. So yeah, so I would say that's this. There's about how we describe our work. So the language that we're using, the ways in which we are talking about our work and to who is crucial if we are serious about attracting people for whom this might be the first ever cultural experience. And the other thing is that I think will really kind of nail this is you have to be clear about your whys. You've got to be clear about the why. So why me? Why here? Why now? Why this? Why do I think that all of those things make me the best person to communicate with people from economic disadvantaged backgrounds? Those are the way. If you can't run your idea, your work, your practice through a mangle of those 4 whys and it still come out intact, it's probably not for that audience anyway. So it feels like that's quite an important kind of process to go on. The why me, why here, why now, why this? Why do I think that this vehicle, this piece of work will reach this audience? And I need to be able to confidently articulate my answer to those things. It's about where you're presenting your stuff. What decisions have you made around where you're presenting it? Is the vehicle for your work associated with a particular type of person, with a particular type of audience? Particularly now, if we're, as we all are, presenting our work more and more in the digital space, what efforts have we made to think about digital isolation and digital exclusion? We are working with families in Barking and Dagenham through lockdown who the only data available in the house was the data package on dad's phone. So that had to be for all of the schooling, for all of the online shopping, for everything. All it was the data package that was on dad's phone. There was no other hardware in the house and no other access to data. So that is a really important consideration when we're thinking about working with audiences for whom money is tight. And what are the ways that you can mitigate against that? Are there kind of joint spaces where stuff can be screened? Can you build into your funding applications, can you build data packages in for families? That's something that we did quite a lot of in lockdown, was giving people data bundles so they could actually access our work in a meaningful way. So that concept of where you present your work is really crucial, particularly in that kind of online conversation. And so it's probably worth interrogating the digital poverty data where you live and where you're intending to show your work. Loads of that stuff exists now. Organisations like Lankelly Chase have been doing some really interesting research over lockdown into those kind of pockets of deprivation and the impact therefore on being able to access digital work. Because I think it's easy for us to go, oh cool, I'll just do it online. But there's a whole piece of work to do around kind of what that means. Then there's a thing about who you collaborate with in this process, right? So as I mentioned earlier, we work with Terence Higgins Trust and we work with food banks and all that kind of stuff. And I'm aware that I'm talking from the privilege of an organisation when I say that. But within your networks, as artists, as people that live in a place, as people that have a responsibility to make work of that place, who's in your networks that you can collaborate with, that means that your work will land meaningfully for communities that we're trying to target in our conversation here today. So it's worth doing a bit of mapping. It's worth doing some mapping around who you want to reach and where those people hang out. What are the community groups that have a direct access to those places? Can I make a connection with those community groups? And will that afford me access to the people that I want to see my work? As I mentioned in my Barbican example, it is worth being tough with venues. It is worth really kind of sticking up for what you believe in with venues when you come to them with your rider for your work. So whether that, wherever you're presenting your work, whether it's in a shopping centre or in a theatre, it is worth having some non-negotiables and being really clear about what they mean in terms of this work. So at the moment, we've got a unit in a shopping centre in Barking called Vicarage Field Shopping Centre, and it's one of those kind of very sort of 1970s shopping centres. No mainstream brands whatsoever, no big shops at all. And we use ours as a gallery because people can't really come into the shop. Well, they can now as lockdown's starting to ease, but we show stuff in the windows. And it's enormously successful for us in terms of reaching people that ain't never going to walk into my theatre space, because the stuff is in a shop window. Like, they've got to go to the post office, they ain't got to come to a theatre. So it's worth kind of thinking about what decisions am I making around that kind of stuff. What was I thinking? Yeah, so and then the thing I was saying earlier about inclusion and inclusive practice and how much you're prepared to let people in, that is a really important thing for you to reflect on as artists and as makers and producers, because it will have a direct impact on how much people are prepared to invest in your work. So are there opportunities to make a curation panel around your work? Do you need a steering group of local voices? What tenants and residents associations can you pitch up at with an offer, not an ask? I think that's always the question. You're turning up with an offer, not an ask. Is they owe you nothing. They owe you nothing. So what ways in which can you open up your practice that would mean that when your thing opens, there's already a demand and an appetite for your work from these kind of communities? And it's worth just getting that kind of undercurrent of data underneath your work. It sounds almost uncreative to say that, but it is worth interrogating the data locally. So the Arts Council have got all sorts of stuff around, what do they call them these days? It used to be hotspots, then cold spots, areas of low engagement, I think they call it now. All of that kind of data sort of exists. Local authorities very often will have a data insight hub where you can really drill down into super output areas in terms of economic mobility and things like that. So you can really be quite targeted in terms of where your work should land. The geography of this stuff is really important. And never think about your work in a vacuum in relation to disadvantaged communities. Because when you disappear, the disadvantage is still there. So for you to, for us to kind of flounce in and be artists can have a negative impact as well as a positive one. So we've got to think very clearly about what is our commitment to this community when the jazz hands, that's a really bad way to describe it. That's Paul. That's why he's put jazz hands in my head today. But after the work has gone, what is left there? And a very recent example of that is my organisation's been working with Kathi's organisation in delivering Bridge as a big kind of touring outdoor arts piece. If Kathi's organisation had brought Bridge to Barking and Dagenham without working in partnership with us, it would have not been received very well. But actually what's left now is all of these kind of community groups that had a really brilliant experience of outdoor arts, and now they want to do more stuff. So my organisation could never have delivered that piece of work because we don't work in that way. We would never even dream of attempting to do something like that. But what we can do is create the right culture for the thing to land. So it's all about that, really. It's all about kind of interrogating who you need. You on your own is never going to be the thing. If that makes sense. You on your own is never going to be the thing. It's about kind of how these things are going to land. What are the conditions under which this thing is arriving, and recognizing that being the new kid on the block can have both positive and negative impact on your work. So I'm working in Southend at the minute. I've got no experience of working in Southend at all. And I literally open with that line every time I turn up there. This is not my patch. I don't know the area. I'm not here to know the area. You are. So please, you lead this process. So I'm working with a group of parents to facilitate and create a festival of conversation in September. But I can't suggest venues. I can't suggest which coffee shop is the best place for parents to hang out in. I don't know. And neither should I even presume that. So I'm taking very much a kind of facilitative approach to letting local people tell the story that they need to tell and in the spaces that they need to do it in. And I think that's really important to my practice and into nailing this kind of stuff. It's about recognizing the responsibility that we've got when we're asking people to impart with the tiniest bit of cash. I think I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So much to think about there. And I'll never look at a kebab in the same way ever again, I don't think. Kathi, is it okay if we go over to you and then we go to a break after yours? Is that all right?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Erin, are you okay? Or, yeah, you're okay for a bit longer? Lovely. Kathi, I'm going to pass straight over to you, and then, like I say, we'll have a quick 5-minute break after that, and then we'll go into a Q&A between Liza and Kathi. Thanks.
Okay, so I'll just introduce myself. So I am a 59-year-old white female. I have long white hair to match that, and it used to be brown, but it's now long and white with a quiff. And I'm also wearing spectacles, and I'm wearing a blue denim jacket, and behind me is a brick wall of a meeting room that has been created during lockdown. And there's also a pole sticking up that it's actually an electrical conduit, but it looks like a silver pole sticking, going up vertically up the wall. So hello everyone. I just want to say first of all, Liza, that was brilliant and really inspiring, and it resonated massively with me and with our processes. And I think actually I've got 3 pieces of paper here, and you've literally covered everything that I could have said through what you were talking about there. I also, the strange thing is I have a parallel kind of start as well, what's driven me and has made me passionate about the work that I do, in the sense I just a quick little background. I have Irish parents. I grew up in an area in Coventry which would be classed as disadvantaged, although I thought it was fantastic to grow up in Willenhall. It was an area where there were a lot of immigrant communities, like my parents who worked in local factories, came over for work. Great community spirit, that's what I grew up in and out of each other's houses. People sharing, looking after kids when you were growing up. You know, everybody's parents worked, so they would kind of through the summer holidays share looking after you. So you had all these different kind of cultural experiences and different foods and different just lots of kids playing together and creating together. I didn't have any access to the arts. So the 3 things that really inspired me, one day, TIE company, Theatre and Education Company, came into our school, and I just thought it was magical. And just an unbelievable experience. I didn't know where they came from, how you could be them, what they were doing, but they were just telling stories, and just my imagination was just flying. We also had a brown box in the corner of the hall, and once a month it came to life with a story that came through it, and we had to run around the hall just pretending to be things. And again, like you, I just loved, well, you called it showing off. For me, it was like just being lost in a world that wasn't the world that I lived in.
Sorry,
And then
to interrupt you, we're going to swap interpreters. That could, that's okay.
And another thing that happened to me in the city centre, once a year, there was a carnival. And I thought these people that did the carnival, when I was sitting there about 8 years old on the edge of the pavement waiting for it to come, I thought they all came from a different land or place. And again, all it was lorries. When I think about it, it was lorries with crepe paper, balloons, kind of cardboard sets built on these lorries and people having a great time, but the atmosphere and the magic for me was just huge. But I didn't know how to get into anything like that. I couldn't do any activities that involved drama or dance or any of that because we didn't have any money. So I think I went to dance for about 3 weeks, and then you had to buy a leotard or shoes, and my mum couldn't afford it. So I think that's my experience has been my driving force as well. A bit like what you were saying, that feeling of why is there a world where some people can afford to do those things and other people can't. So I think the barriers now, or looking at the barriers, Liza, you've covered all of them that I would say as well. So thinking about poverty, that choice really, it exists even more now, I would say, than when I was growing up, of what are you choosing to spend your money on? You know, people who have got to put food on the table. Leisure is just not an option. It's not an option. It's not just choosing to go and see something and pay for it. It's how do you get there? You can't afford the transport. Some people from their areas may go into the centre of a city, in my case it's Coventry, once a week to do a shop. Or they may get the bus to their local supermarket once a week. If you're bringing 3 kids with you, or you've got to consider, you know, that's bus fare. That's all of their bus fares as well. So as Liza was saying, it's that real, you don't have a choice. You're just trying to, at the moment, put food on the table. So poverty, huge thing. Assumptions is another thing. Language, there are massive language barriers between all sectors. If we work with engineers or architects or educationalists, everybody has their own language, and everybody assumes that we understand we understand what they're talking about. So there's an arts language that most people not in the arts have no idea what you're talking about. So there's an assumption, I think people make assumptions of what is the arts. We run a program, transformations, and one of the first questions on the enrolment form is what is your experience of, what do you think art is, and what's your experience of it? And most people still write, you know, drawing. It's kind of, they don't, the kind of width of what the kind of arts that we all do, that isn't there, that language isn't there to even express it or even understand how many kind of jobs there are within the arts, or potential opportunities. So the assumptions also come from both sides. As Liza was saying, we can assume what going to a place is going to be. You know, it's lots of posh people. It's my dad used to say, I don't know where to go. I don't know where's the bar. I don't know what to do. What do I dress up in? Will there be people there I can speak to? Like absolute panic, having a panic attack about going into a venue. And then the other way, it's just arts is posh for posh people. So this kind of assumptions on are not a real understanding of or reality of what these different art forms are. I think content as well. Liza said it. It's about resonating with lived experience, but not patronising. But also, people who are already struggling, or maybe passionate or doing things in their life. They don't want somebody to come in and create something that's really, really depressing about their life, which they haven't created with them. And so to the telling of stories, whose stories are being told, who, you know, is there an ownership over that? So it's representing people, but it's also how we represent one another. That's a big area, I think. And if you don't, there's something, a phrase which is nothing about us without us. Don't do to us, don't do at us, don't do on us. It's that kind of just having a think about that really. Complex home lives and challenges, you know, again, poor mental health, isolation, no support. There's lots of reasons why people don't go out, leave their home, can't access anything. So it's about all of those. How are we going to work with that to make sure that everybody has that access? We've said loads about buildings, behaviours, rules, who creates the rules. no reference point, no modeling, there's no audience modeling. We used to, years ago, I used to work in a company, we used to take work into clubs. And I was really delighted when everyone was shouting out in the middle, joining in. There was no fourth wall. And it was about, you know, for me, the relationship, particularly in theatre or performing, is it's a conversation between the audience and the performers. So what, you know, there was no, the audiences we were going to didn't know the rules of theatre, thankfully. So there was a real kind of liveliness about, they'd say to a character, go on, give him that, you know, they'd be kind of encouraging. And that was actually a real breath of fresh air and something that we were really open to and enjoyed. So maybe think about the rules, maybe disrupting the rules that are there. How can we disrupt those rules and make it a more equal playing field? Class, I think you said something, Liza, which really resonates with me. I'm always feeling like an imposter. It hasn't changed in 35 years. And I think that's confidence. It's cultural confidence, but there's also class confidence that I walk into a room, and because I've still got that, you know, Willing Hall girl in me from working class background, that I'll walk into a space and everybody's chatting and I'm inside like panicking. I'm looking for somebody that I know rather than go around and network to somebody, because I don't have that confidence. I still don't have that kind of, I don't know what it is, education, middle class. I don't have that confidence. And a lot of people that we work with, you can see they don't have that confidence. So outsiders coming in, people they think come from a different economic background to them, they immediately, you know, that there can be a tightening up about even speaking. Cultural barriers and language barriers are two things as well. When you're making your work, that thinking about that, you know, I'm sure we all live in, we're living in a global kind of world now, where in Coventry, for example, there's 125 languages spoken. We are in a place that we maybe need to think about the work we make, not just how it can be interpreted, but actually how we are making it in the first place. So what are we using, you know, visual, language, physical, all of those things. How can we make work that is engaging? Liza's covered literally most things I could say. I think I just would like to bring up a couple of things of maybe how we could maybe address some of the points that she raised. So when you were talking about, my starting point is always that public funding, when you're making work, it's already been paid for by the people who are you're going to share it with, or they're going to share with you. So why do people then have to buy a ticket? Sorry, this is the bit of me that goes there. So I moved from work that was where you had to buy a ticket to work where any place that felt like an even playing field, like the streets for carnival. It's an equal place. Everybody owns the streets. Outside work where they didn't have to buy a ticket. I know that there have to be tickets for certain places, but I'm starting at that point. So my starting point is, how can I make that work free for everybody? So if I've got public funding, they've already contributed to that anyway. Most people have contributed to that in some way, shape or form. So where else can I bring money in to make work? So it's about that, mapping your community or the people that you want to reach or you want to work with. So you start with that community and you say, right, how do we build capacity, and how do we build, you know, how do we find the funding that comes into that? So you map your community, who's there, what social, you know, so what services are there, what youth organisations are there, youth services, what community services, what neighbourhood services are there, or people working on the ground, NHS, policing teams, everybody who has a vested interest, businesses, every single person that has a vested interest in that community, in building up that community, including the people themselves. They already have that interest. They are there, they exist, they're working there. So it's about being brave enough to go in and say to people, I don't know anybody here, where do I start? Who are the people who are the best people to talk to? You can look up some of those organisations, but the best thing to do is actually go, you know, walk yourself in there and meet people who will then tell you, you need to talk to this person and this person and that person. And that's how you, for me, it's always been on the ground. Recruitment's on the ground. All of that is about really just communication, listening and talking. So both those things, because sometimes we just do one. We do a lot of the talking. We don't do a lot of the listening. So also those organisations are often they have money. You know, they'll have some money because they want to achieve the same things. You know, people want pride in the community. People want raise aspirations. They want to develop their pathways to progression. You know, we have a kind of soft touch as well, a soft way. You know, the arts is seen as that kind of, it's far more engaging, sports and arts, than other ways of engaging people. So forming those relationships, mapping your community, forming the relationships, finding out and doing your research before you even start to make your work. I think that's the, you know, and talking eventually, if you go in with some of those people, they're the people that, local people in communities that are deemed, you know, lower economic disadvantage, they're who people trust. They're the people who people in those communities trust and have a relationship that's been built over years. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to build your trust with your audience like you would do in any other situation. So even if you're doing a small show, or you know, it's a small audience number, you don't want to be using public funding to then just play to your friends and family and other artists, because that's public funding. That's my personal view, but it's public funding. So how are you going to develop even those, you know, 70 capacity venues if you're going to do it in a venue? So that's one, I'd say. That's about building relationships, and gradually those people will trust you. Doing some work with communities before you create work about them, because you're trying to create work with them. If you want to tell, if you're going to be the conduit to expressing, you know, through visual art or music or theatre or anything, you're trying to do that with them, collaborate and co-create. So I think that's you've got to build and develop that trust and that relationship. So that's one. If you are, again, you talked about venues, Liza, and I think it's really important to go into all sorts of areas and look at what are potential, what are spaces that have problems in, and changing those perception of those spaces with people who want to change the perception of those spaces, but not taking the spaces away. So young people may hang out in a place and people go, oh, too many people hanging out in that corner, we don't want, that's their space. So you can't go in and go, well, we're going to do something about that space to suit somebody else. It's about, again, understanding what are the spaces and places and venues that, you know, again, you can utilize and enliven with them. If you're going to bring them to somewhere, find partners who will pay for that transport. So we've done a few things where we've, you know, we found a business, or we found another organisation who wants to. So, for example, a transport museum laid on some old buses because they wanted to encourage people to visit the transport museum, but they laid on buses to take people from certain areas in the city to another event for us. So it's working both ways. You know, again, what's the ask? It's going in and saying, what can we do for each other? We never approach a business and say, can we just have some money, please? We never do that. It's like, what can we all do for each other? So again, the Rico Arena, opening the Rico Arena, that was supposed to be for everyone. So on the day, again, we made sure that we could work with West Midlands Transport to bring free buses of people, you know, because some people have got pushchairs, kids, lots of things going on. They need, you know, and to go there for a day was great. If they knew it was free, it was more encouraging for them to travel somewhere else. So I think that, I think you talked about the digital side. We've just recently, that's right, we all get into streaming, and then we're thinking, well, we've got older people who don't do that. We've got digital poverty. So we have to think, sometimes you have to go back to old school as well. We were asked for, can we turn some of the streaming stuff back into DVDs to get that out to places, or then into clubs where people met, you know, friendship groups or other things. So although we see progress going always in one direction, I think we have to think about all of the other ways of you know, communicating and getting our work to people. what was the other one I was going to say?
I'll just switch over while you're thinking of that, if that's okay.
Not much more, Paul, because I'm aware of time. Food is a really important thing. So I'll give you an example of that. So I've seen a real massive difference over the last 10 years of doing, we used to create carnival, and we used to set up masquerade camps around in what was deemed lower economic area, disadvantaged areas, neighbourhoods in the city, and we'd be working with families and young people for 6 weeks, but we'd be there every year, and we'd be working with them over a period of 6 months in the lead up and stuff. But there would be a kind of concentration period of 6 weeks while they come in and they make their costumes, build their music, their choreography, and it was always geared around developing an event within that community that they wanted to develop, but also they would also then be part of a large-scale event in the city centre, which was about raising their own profile and saying, look, this is the Willow and Hall crew doing this in the city centre, or the Bell Green crew, but also adding and building capacity and inspiring in their own communities. People coming into that gradually over the years, we saw that kids came in hungry, their concentration was poorer, all of this. So we started to bring in like fruit and other things that would just be, try to do the healthy eating thing as well. And that's very difficult because obviously, it's easy to go to Iceland and get, 20 burgers when you've got to feed lots of kids. So it's great to go in and talk healthy, but you've got to also be aware of, is that accessible for people? Is it affordable? How are we going to do that change? So we do start bringing in fruit and other things. We've also run a project, the Imaginarium Initiative, where primary schools come to our space, and again we've started to notice that lots of children coming with no breakfast, no drinks. At lunchtime there's a lunch provided by the school, but they're not having breakfast. There'd be some breakfast clubs, which is great, but you can see children, and some children staying up a lot later at night, or children they're staying in a hotel because they're homeless, deemed homeless, and they can't concentrate, they're all in one room. There's lots and lots of issues that are there that you may not see, that's not visible. So it's thinking through all of that when you're working with people as well, being very, you've got to be obviously very careful about those conversations, but I think just to be aware, and that's the same, asking, when you're asking people to come to some work, I think it was great when Liza was saying about having the food banks and everybody else there. That's exactly where it should be going, or needs to go, I think. Okay, I really don't, I think marketing is the final thing I would say, that for us, marketing massively for a lot of the group, a lot of the people we're talking about, is word of mouth. They're only going to trust to come to something because somebody that validates it, that they know, that they trust. So you can't just go, we'll have a marketing campaign and it goes out on social media and it goes out on this, that and the other. It needs to be on the ground. You need to be going in and again getting working with your partners to validate, to make sure that people that you want, that you're hoping are going to be at what it is you're doing, are going to know about it or hear about it, because why should they be looking for it? I mean, I'd say a lot of people that currently won't be accessing, I keep hearing this, won't be accessing City of Culture website because they wouldn't think it's for them. Some of them, they won't know what that means, that actual phrase. But if you said to them, there's going to be a massive fireworks show in the park just beside you, it's free, then they're going to, and then you start to develop that language, or that there's other things when they're there, or engage them. So it's again, think about marketing is best, get on the ground, get out, go to places where people are going to be visiting and being, so yeah, walk-in centres, anywhere that you can leave your stuff, shops, local shops, local web, sports groups, other things, if you want that crossover. So yeah, marketing strategy has got to be bespoke to whatever it is you're doing. You can't just do one size fits all every time you do something, because then it's just going to be your friends. And I think that's a real question for all of us about smaller scale work. How do we stop it being that the tickets always just go immediately to other arts, or people in the arts and our friends, when it's only a limited capacity? How can we build that? Can we start doing extra, or rehearsals or performances that we actually purposely commit to taking somewhere or doing somewhere which isn't going to be the venue that it's in? Or I don't know, but something about how do we do that? Sorry, that was a bit rambly after Liza, because she covered every single thing that was on the sheet. Brilliant.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much. My head's sort of exploding with questions and thoughts for you both. So I think now, partly so I can sort them into some sort of questioning, now would be a really good time for just a quick 5-minute break. For your needs, for coffee, of course, not for the question purposes, but do get thinking up some really wonderful questions for the both, and we'll come back at the precise time of 12:42, where we'll then go into an open Q&A where you can ask any questions you like to them both. See you in 5. Thanks again, Kathi and Liza.
Thank you.
Yes, so as I sort of said, like, I think from both of you, it's sort of hugely inspiring to hear your work and your journey to sort of create that work, and you've given us so many sort of practical things to take away and impart in our work, so thank you very much for that. I guess I wanted to start a little bit by talking a little bit about cultural confidence. And Liza, I was thinking about what you were saying about walking into a pub and finding that really that kind of intimidating. And actually, I hadn't really thought about that moment of going into a pub before, but I also hate that. Like, I hate that experience of going in and not knowing where they are and like all of those things. And so I guess I was reflecting on the sort of short break there that I'm not a particularly underconfident individual, and it doesn't particularly bother me. But if you find ways to break that thing, it makes everything more enjoyable for everyone, even in a little way. And actually, that resonates quite a lot with the other sessions that we've had through this program, of just these things that are helping somebody in a wheelchair, or are helping somebody who's deaf or hard of hearing or partially sighted, actually have really positive implications for everyone. And so I just wanted to, I guess, reflect a little bit on cultural confidence and ways in which we can explore that in our work and use that, break that, I guess, or break the barriers affecting that. I don't know if you want to pick up.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's something that we don't talk about enough. I think there's that assumption that if we put a thing on in a community centre and there's posters up, that people are just gonna take the plunge. And for me, it's about it's an investment, ain't it? You know what I mean? And it's about recognizing that people are investing in something. But that kind of over the threshold of a pub thing, I think, is the best analogy that we can use. So what can we do as practitioners to take away all of those little variables that might, impact upon that moment, sort of thing? So what we often do is we make a video of the journey from Barking Station to our front door. So you can't get lost. If you got this video, you just follow it, and then you're there. We make sure we've got one of our members of staff outside the gaff, not inside, so that when people turn up, there's even someone on the pavement going, "Hiya, blah blah blah," and then you've done that thing. I like to do things. I like to put a face to a name before I go somewhere, always. I've got quite significant anxiety as a human, and PTSD, and it helps me to know what is about to happen to me. So I try to make sure that someone connected to the thing has met as many local people as possible. so that they'll go, oh, it's what's the name? And then, you know, that little bit of who is it going to be has been taken away. So yeah, so for me, I just interrogate all of those moments where a bit of anxiety might come out. I make sure I publish the price list of the drinks in advance. So, you know, you don't feel caught short at the bar or anything like that. I very clearly will talk about what the thing is about. So, you know, what you might expect from the performance. So if anyone is triggered by anything, they don't have to wait until they turn up to see a thing on the wall to say there's going to be strobe lighting or it's about suicide or whatever. All that stuff in advance. People have got to be able to make an informed decision, particularly people for whom, you know, there's a big deal. Like, so I think that if you think about all of the variables of the thing and then work out backwards how to mitigate against them, you're enabling that cultural confidence by stealth, really. And yeah, that's how I approach it. I don't know what you think, Kathi.
Well, I was just going to add that I think there's a couple of other things that if it's possible to do, which is because it's about what we're talking about. Some of it is about familiarity and control, and the other thing is control, isn't it? So feeling out of control and feeling comfortable in the place. So there's another thing which you could encourage, which is to visit the place if it's going to be a venue that's unfamiliar beforehand, and just be able to just have a real walk around and ask questions, because it's a really simple thing, but you just need to ask people, what are they unsure of? What is it that they, you know, are assuming is going to happen or they don't like, or, you know, so again, communication is the first thing. We used to do a thing at the Belgrade, which was like, you know, the touch tours, which was really, the good thing about the touch tours was it also got visually impaired people and blind people on the stage. So you're breaking the barrier of you normally would be sitting, you know, in this position and the stage is there in front of you, but they were and touching all of the costumes and other things. So, but I think that goes generally. If you can wander around a space and demystify it, there is obviously you don't want to take magic away, but just leaving that, you know, there's a lot of anxiety. We have in some of our projects working with people on the autistic spectrum, and some of those people that really need to know exactly what's going to happen from moment to moment. So just spending the time to go through all of that, and if that schedule goes out of sync, just being aware that, you know, again, that you need to kind of keep communicating with people who are worried about those kind of things. So yeah, just if you can kind of get people to be familiar with a place. And one of the things my dad used to worry about was, what if I start coughing? Because he used to cough a lot, but he was really worried about that. What do I do? And I said, well, you can always get up and leave, or we can make sure that try and get a seat on the aisle, or, you know, and so you don't ever know what's in somebody's head, what is the thing that they're going to be worrying about.
I did a piece of work a little while ago with Jess Tom, Tourette's hero. Don't know if you've come across Jess. She's absolutely brilliant. At Battersea Arts Centre. And it was about, you know, this concept of like relaxed performances. Well, what her sort of model was, we should just have relaxed venues. What is this? Like, people that require relaxed performance can only come Sunday the 23rd at 4 o'clock. If we, you know, unless there is a compelling artistic reason for, you know, super, super loud music, or it has to be a complete blackout, you know, or you're not allowed to walk out halfway because you're coughing or whatever, then let's just make that a default so the whole venue feels relaxed and welcoming, rather, you know what I mean? And I thought that was actually the most common sense thing I've heard for ages.
Well,
I think that's a good point.
Actually, just to come into there, just as a little bit of side promotion, is we've got a session in 2 weeks on relaxed events and relaxed performances.
Okay.
So if people want to find out a bit more about that, then we will have a session on that. Sorry, Kathi, over to you.
No, I was just going to say that it is really funny that it's like everything in life. I think we've got lots of rules with venues, and actually we haven't there hasn't been a lot of discussion about why are they there, and do we still need some of them, or you know, it's just that it's just accepted. This is the way certain things are. Their behaviours, aren't they? So maybe we should interrogate those a little bit more about why, you know, why are they there, and who still wants them, and do we need some of them? because we don't
Yeah.
have them in other, you know, in all art forms. So that when you, particularly that fourth wall thing and breaking that, and you sit there and you watch us do something, and we'll, you know, it's kind of because the conversation maybe is only through the piece, but not, you know, whereas when you're doing walking tours or you're doing stuff outside on the streets, you know, or the interaction, there's far more engagement, I think, in well, I'll get into trouble now, but I feel that is really about, because if somebody isn't engaged, they're going to leave and walk away, and that is a really good. But we don't have that in venues. It's almost like once you're in there, unless you really are making a point and getting up and walking out. So we don't really, and then they go, and we don't really know what anybody thought of it, really. We only know what our friends or the critics thought, but we don't, unless we engage with people, we don't know. So I think there's a bit of a bubble that goes on, that maybe we need to pop the bubble a bit more.
Yeah, I totally agree, because a lot of it is like old-fashioned ritual stuff around theatre spaces, and actually like white cube spaces as well, in lots of senses. And that is kind of nonsense, really. And it, you know, it doesn't help people relax.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just Isabel's asking where to sign up for the other sessions. I will, and then she's told me that the form is locked, so I need to unlock the form. I shall do that in a minute and put that in the chat and put it out on our socials as well. I was just going to pick up on this word that keeps popping up, and it's demystifying. And Liza, I remember when we met a couple of weeks ago, you were talking about trailers as well, and how they, because what you've sort of picked up there is the demystifying the space, or demystifying how you get to the space, or anything, a lot of the sort of confidence around that area of things. But we've also touched on a little bit the sort of experience, and why I should give two hoots about the experience. So if you could tell us about sort of the trailers that you create for performances, that would be great.
Yeah, for sure. I make I do it in a couple of ways. Number one, I always do a Facebook Live. I do a Facebook Live for Studio 3 Arts at least like once a week, regardless of where I am. If I'm backstage at a thing, or if I'm setting up a thing, or if I'm just doing admin, I will just do one of those, because I just think it's quite an immediate way of folk kind of connecting with who I am and what I'm doing. And then we always make a trailer for every project that we do, and it's not necessarily a polished thing. It might just be me with my phone, but it sort of goes, here we are, this is how we're going to do it, these are the materials we're going to use, this is Steve, he's one of the artists, you're going to meet Steve when you come. It's going to be dead simple, you can bring a drink, you don't have to stay for the whole thing, and we just go through the whole process, just so that then, yeah, as you say, the thing is demystified, but it's humanized as well, because there's just this concept that, you know, arty people are these like magical, you know, wizards, and they know the rules and nobody else does. And I hate that in any form of life at all, when you feel like you're not in the gang. So anything you can do to ungang it, you know, it just needs to be done, doesn't it? So it's dead simple. We just make a little thing and just introduce anyone watching to the space, the people, the tools we're going to use, where it's happening, and anything people need to know.
And Kathi, is there anything as well you do in your work that helps demystify the experience a bit more? Because we sometimes, particularly in solo theatre, and I studied contemporary theatre at uni, we often think we can't tell them anything. They need to come in with a blank mind, and they need to read into things that I have not even thought that they would read into, and it needs to be mystical and it needs to be experimental, and that's what's going to get me my 5-star review in The Guardian. But I guess is there ways in which I guess we can break those things, or play with those things in ways that help make the experience a bit more open for people?
I think it's more through our practice. So we do similar things. We have some videos that go out because our practice goes across all of our work. I think one of the things we do is through our education work. So we engage with young people and children, primary children right from the beginning. So we have a process which is Imagine, Make, Inspire. And that process we use that to make our own work and we also use that when we're working with through our Imaginarium Initiative, for example. So we worked with 15 primary schools. They come in and we kind of show them how do we get to the end thing. So they'll come in and look at, for example, our big Godiva or the bridge or something, and they'll go, wow, that's amazing, but they can't place themselves in knowing how that could ever be made, how they could ever be part of doing something like that, or creating it, or is it an actual job? They think that, you know, being an Imagineer is a job by the end of it, which is great because they're all Imagineers. So how we do that is we take them through a process. So they see something at the end thing, which is the inspiring thing, but the process is for them to inspire others. So to understand that how you make something, you first imagine it, you first have lots of ideas, but then you work together. It's through collaboration and teamwork that not one person can do something like that. So I suppose I'm picking it all, and then people, by understanding how we actually end up with something, they see a whole process and they begin to see all the different jobs that it involves, and they can begin to see that maybe something along that line is how they align themselves. There's that, but also the other thing I would say is through going out and working, placing yourself in with a community, working with groups, people, and building trust, and is gradually, gradually they're being part of the process to see the, you know, how you'd create something by being with them. And it's a harder one, but then actually they develop an audience, because then they gradually build the confidence to be part of it, and then they'll bring somebody with them, and then that next person will, you know, or maybe we could go and see another thing like that, or, you know, it's a very slow kind of, there's a kind of slow process. So
I think it takes years.
We do videos, I think, as well, but we're different because we don't have a venue. Liza has a venue, and we don't have that venue.
I mean, I think it's a long process, and I think it's something that doesn't happen overnight. So, you know, I said earlier about that boiler engineer in his 50s. Yeah, I alluded to him earlier, who didn't want to get on the stage at the Barbican. Well, he's the vice chair of our board now. He was a local geezer from Barking, and when I first met him, he really told me about myself. He was just like, we were doing this big promenade production of Merchant of Venice, and there was about 150 people in the cast, and 10 professional actors, 100 odd local people, moved through 10 venues in the town centre, blah, blah, blah. And I did like a scratch reading of a couple of scenes in a library, and he came, and I'd never met this geezer before. And he told me about my life. This is going to be shit. You don't know what you're doing. I've never heard of you. I see theatre all the time, blah, 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 blah. I'm not coming. And I was like, well, come get involved then. Come and, if you know better than me, come and show me, man. And that was in 2015. And now he's the vice chair of our board. And I couldn't run Studio 3 Arts without Dim now, and without voices like his, like, and he definitely sees more theatre than I do. You know, he goes like 4 or 5 times a week. But it was important that I gave that credence and space and time, because he was really important to him that it was good. And, you know, it's important to listen to those kind of dissenting voices, because they generally are coming from a good place.
Sorry to interrupt. We're just going to swap.
No problem.
Can I add one more thing, Paul? Sorry, it's just a...
Hold on, just for the BSL swap. Just was it? You good? Yeah, sorry, Kathi.
One of the things we come across a lot is that with I'd say our kind of 16 to 30-year-olds who come in, is that they don't know what opportunities exist, because the whole education system and arts and everything else, everything we've been talking about, leads you to think there's only probably 3 jobs in theatre, or in any arts, which is you're either an artist and you paint, you're a performer or an actor, or you tell everybody what to do. I'm trying to think of some more, or you play an instrument, and that's the arts for most people. So one of the first things is that if we're not getting more people coming through that represent more people, so the actual work that is, you know, can only be within people's own experience that you're creating in the end, and what you see in the world around you, if you're reflecting the world. So we've got to get more people coming through that go into, you know, but in order for them to come through and do that, we've got to demystify what the whole thing is. So I think part of the the aim of projects. For example, Media Mania, who are based here, they have a music project, and then we had our Imaginarium thing. We've partnered because what we've realized is there's probably about 30 different jobs within kind of recording studio music that exist. But when young people come, they just think it's making, you can only be an artist making music, all that. So they don't know about Foley work, they don't know sound engineering, crewing on stages, all of this. And I think part of our job as well is to encourage that more people to access it, to come through and realize that you can have a career in all of these things, in order to create, and also for them to create the work that again reflects back their experience. Because we're only probably are well, when you go and see why I don't go to a lot of stuff is because I'm just not interested in some of it. I have to be honest, I'm just not, it doesn't interest me. So it's kind of because it's not reflecting, the wider experiences of everybody. So and we've got to take away that thing about going into an art gallery that they hang on the wall. How do we make that relationship? How do we demystify that? You can't touch that. Don't know why. Well, I know why, but a lot of people go, why can't we touch it? Why can't we feel this sculpture? And that's a thing. So there's it's about really creating, I think, creating stuff. And with Godiva, for example, we made this big tool, Godiva, and she's got it's art and engineering working together. And one of the first things, how are you going to cover up all of that? The gubbins, and we're like, we don't want to cover that up because that's what's going to interest loads of people who would never get interested in art or arts. We get loads of people who are like shed people, and like Liza there in her shed, who just are fascinated by the workings of something, but then come to your event because their interest went over it. So I don't know, like you said, let's uncover some of the stuff, and there's lots of ways, I think, of demystifying.
And also, as well, picking up what you said there about you don't go to loads of stuff because they don't interest you. I think sometimes we make assumptions about people from low economic backgrounds that they're not coming to stuff because they can't afford it. But we never consider that it might not just not be very good stuff. And, we've made an assumption that the reason they ain't coming is because they can't afford the ticket, but it might be crap. And so a lot of the time, my team get bored to tears of me. The first thing I say, if something doesn't go quite how we thought it was going to, I always say, right, well, let's look in the mirror then, squad. Let's look in the mirror first. What didn't we do? Let's take that responsibility before we go, oh, no one came. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I often think that, like, oh, nobody came because it was, and it might be that it was a Wednesday evening or whatever, but also it might just be that I didn't market it in the right way, or didn't reach out the show in the right way. That sort of connects to another thing that sort of came up across both of yours, was that thought of arts language, which and particularly Kathi, you were picking up on that. And I when I was making a show about football, and I was interviewing people around around the football ground at Stockton-on-Tees, and the filmmaker who was working with me always laughs at me asking a footballer if he could unpack that emotion, and she was like, what the heck does unpack that emotion mean? That's ridiculous. And she was behind the camera going like that, because you could just see his face go. But I guess my question around that is, how do we work out what language is artsy fartsy language? How do we find the ways to communicate with people for whom that language is not their first nature? Like you were saying, Kathi, if I was speaking to an architect, they'd be using words that they just use every day, and I'd be like, what the hell is a blah 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 pillar? I don't know.
So yeah. I've had that on developing this building. So many contractors, everybody does it. So it's not just artsy fartsy. It's the fact that we all have acronyms, or we all have words that we have got so used to, and we assume that everybody within our field understands those. So it's a shortcut, isn't it? It's the same. Everybody creates their own. Youth culture creates its own language. All sorts of people do. The first thing is to just say it straight away. Is to say, sorry, what do you mean by that? What's that word? and to own up, because there's also a lot of people who just kind of go along with it, and you don't realize that actually people haven't been understanding each other until later on, because again, sometimes it's confidence. I didn't want to look stupid by saying I don't know what you mean. So the first thing is I think if you're working across collaboration, if there's collaborative work, that you talk that out at the beginning, or every time something comes up, you say we're going to agree that we all use different words, and if we don't, you've got to just set the tone at the beginning and make it a it's not punishable. It's not you're not stupid if you don't understand it. So if we say at the beginning, and we're going to do that, and that kind of lays out the playing field. I think it's harder with, like you're saying, ritual and also different cultural. I remember saying to, I can't remember, we were working with drummers across different, and people said, we're not professional performers or community performers, we're drummers. And it was like, there's other areas within that. But I think for the language thing, I think you have to just at the beginning say that's what we're going to do. I think there's a different thing about being going and seeing a piece of work and talking about it afterwards, because I get, again, I'll stand and I'll hear arts people saying, oh, the focus was this, or they were leading to climax there, or they didn't really create, it was, rhythmically it was this. And other people seeing work will not use that kind of language to talk about it. So again, you want to engage with people and get what did they feel, what did they think, what did they love, what didn't hit with them. Some simple things that actually are really what are you creating work for that? It's actually, at the end of the day, there's two things: it makes us feel, or it makes us think, or it does both. And that's being able to maybe have not putting people off by that language, just to be aware of it. I think
as well, like, we can ask people how they want it to be talked about as well. So if I'm trying to get young people to come to a thing, then I ask them to help me design the flyer. I'm a 43-year-old white woman from Wales. I ain't going to be able to communicate with black boys from Dagenham as confidently as they can to each other. So I just ask them to come in, buy them a pizza and say, please help me to design this flyer. And we do that with all the different groups that we work with, or, let's come up with a common language for this work. It's not my gift to make those choices. And I think you can smell it a mile off, can't you? When, a corporate marketing team has tried to reach out to a particular subset of the community, you can smell it. So I just think you avoid that just by simply going to the target market in the first place and saying, like, how do we do this? And then they're engaged from the word go then as well, aren't they?
I was just thinking as well about, I took Mom to go and see Hamilton a few years back, and the thing she kept saying was, that was the most professional opening I've ever seen. That was the most professional this, and professional was the words that, like, she kept using. And I was like, I didn't correct her on it, because but I was like, what do you mean by professional? Like, the artist in me was wanting to go, how do you define professional? What do you mean by professional? And really, like, professional was enough. Like, I sort of got what she meant by that, and that was her way of saying she was really excited by it, and it was really high quality, and it was all these words where we'd have a grander vocabulary to sort of express that, but actually professional was enough of a word to describe that. That just popped into my head as you were talking. But Lisa,
that did bring up something though about I was thinking this the other day about a lot of audience will not make a distinction between professional and community. They'll watch something and it's whether they enjoy it, whether it makes, they feel some, or whatever, they see themselves in it. I think if you can't see yourself in something, that's it. It's lost in a way. So you have to see yourself somewhere in it, some life experience in it, and they won't use that, but that's used to death from the other side of it. you know, almost like it's a professional and community show, or they don't know what that is, what that means. Often it's us that are making those, you know, or the arts world that makes those distinctions. So maybe what she meant is just really tight, and it was you know, that we all should be working towards being professional, but I don't know. Yeah, interesting choice of words.
Yeah. Lisa, you had your hand up, but it might have passed now. I don't know if you...
No, just so many questions. I'm finding this all fascinating. But I suppose one of the things that I was sat here thinking was, if I was restarting now, what would be useful to know? Because I know a lot of people I've spoken to recently, you know, mentoring, that kind of thing, are like, how do you start these connections with people? Where does it begin? And how, I know Kathi, you touched on talking to people and saying, what can we do for each other? And Liza, sorry, you talked about you know, partnering with groups that already exist. But I just wondered if you had any advice for people kind of very early on in this journey, how to start working with these audiences.
I think the first thing is not assuming that there isn't something there already, because lots of times when, you know, when people embark upon a project, they assume that this is the most original idea, no one's ever done this in this place before, this is going to be brand new. And, you know, it might be, but there's every chance there's something similar might exist in a place. So I would never start from a point of view of thinking, you know, I'm going to change people's lives here because, you know, I'm this person. So I think it's about being sensitive and humble to what already exists. Not necessarily just in a geography, but in a culture, in a venue, in a, you know, in an art form, whatever it is, just kind of being really in tune to that stuff. And I learned a new word a couple of years ago, and I use it a lot now. It's a French word, bricolage. You can have this for free, everyone. Bricolage, and it basically means building with the materials that's available to you at hand in that moment. So like starting where people are at and using what's around. So it comes from, well, it kind of connects to sort of asset-based community development, which I'm quite interested in. So you never start in this process from a deficit model. You're not assuming there is a gap and I'm going to fill it with my wonder. You're going, there's a really interesting climate and something going on here, and I think I've got something that can add to that. And I think like that's the best lesson to learn when approaching a thing. Kathi, what do you think?
Exactly that. I think you go out and you find out what's there and who the people are. And I often one of those, you can go and you can talk to people in within the arts community that you belong to, the kind of people who are already doing this kind of work or working with that, and they will point you to somebody. This is a great person to go and talk to in this community or this, and it's unlocking. And there's always those people that are the unlockers, you know, that they're not gatekeepers, they're the open door. I think you'll also find some gatekeepers, but the open door, there's always people who are the kind of linchpins, and you have a conversation with that person and you talk about your practice and your interest for doing that work in the first place, and they will point you to people. And I would say get to know communities before you decide what you're doing, you know, as a piece of work or an artist, because I think it's exactly what Liza said. Often people go, I've got a great idea and it'd be great for these people, and that's the thing that starts you off almost like the back to front thing, which becomes very, very difficult to undo because you're constantly on the back foot trying to fit your thing into the square, you know, the round thing in the square. So yeah, find people who are already working in that field, or who have been working, you know, for a while, particularly if you're starting out and you're young, and then get that linchpin and go in and just have conversations. And people are really, you'll find that it's a scary thing. I think a lot of people are scared to just, but actually, because we're in a world where it's all emails and, you know, computer and all of this, but actually it's on the ground. That's what people are most comfortable doing in those settings as well. So yeah, I think it's the same. I'd say our approach is the same.
Great. Should we...
The business, sorry, the other way around. And I was just going to say about when you said about the other side of it, what do people want? If you are looking at the other side in funding, we've done quite a few things now which are like this, which is you create something like a meal, like you can just do a small thing, or like we've done massive ones when we needed, lots of people on board, but you can do small ones, and you try and find other businesses or organisations who have got a vested interest in that community, and invite them for some food and have a conversation around the food, how you might all work together, what you can bring, what they're already bringing, and how you can kind of complement each other. We raised £250,000 worth of stuff, or in kind kind of things, by doing that, rather than asking loads of people for money. We were asking people skills, materials, what could they, we didn't even know what they could offer. We were just saying, do you want to be part of this? What can you bring? We're bringing this, what could you bring? And that's been an amazingly successful way for us, often far more than just asking for money.
I'm just going to do the BSL switcheroo. That's okay. Let me know when you're ready, Lisa. I should have also said, it's a bit late now, but if you do have questions, please do chip in with them or throw them into the chat, or raise your digital hand and we can fire them off to you, for you. I guess I have a question about ticket cost, and I mean, I could have a whole other conversation with you, Liza, about the Barbican. But I guess with ticket costs, I think a thing that a lot of artists are trying to work out in their head is how they negotiate a reduced ticket price for people who require that to access the show. So, and both in terms of how do you make sure middle class Jerry doesn't take advantage of that and exploit the system, kind of thing, just as much as how do you not patronize that person by going, oh, here's a cheaper ticket for you. Like there's things around that which are quite complex, I think. So if you have any sort of practical tips as to how you as a building do that, or how in the Barbican, was that successful in the Barbican, or was it a lot of middle class people coming to get a cheaper show than they'd usually get?
It was tricky. I mean, we ended up making a brilliant show with the Barbican, and the partnership ended up really well, but it was a really kind of bumpy road to get there. So at one point, one of their suggestions was, well, we'll give you a discount code for people from Barking and Dagenham. So they'll go to your website, get the discount code, and then they'll come back to the Barbican's website, they'll put the code in, and then they can buy a ticket. And I was like, this is like the Hunger Games to buy a ticket for a show. We ain't playing this game. Like, this is not happening. So all the tickets are this price, or none of the tickets are this price. We had to be quite sort of directive on it. But what I ended up doing was like block booking all the tickets and then doing my own little mini box office in Barking and Dagenham so folk could just buy them, and then we put on a charabanc and took everybody up to the Barbican. But for our building, we are really sort of getting into this right now, because we're in the process of doing this capital refurb, and for the first time ever we're going to have a budget line, an income line that is about earned income. We've never really needed to do that before because our model hasn't really required it. And I've been talking to folk, colleagues at like Battersea Arts Centre, who are now doing a completely pay what you can model. And, trying to work out what our sort of, for want of a less knobby term, dynamic pricing model might look like. And I suppose for us in Barking and Dagenham, there ain't that many middle class Jerrys knocking about. So we can do a thing where we can say, if you've got a Barking and Dagenham postcode, that will be your discount code to get tickets. And if you're not from Barking and Dagenham, it's at this price. Because in terms of kind of poverty and disadvantage, Barking and Dagenham is middle class Jerry's. Barking and Dagenham is relatively kind of linear, I suppose, in terms of the fact that there's not much money here at all. But what we are starting to see now, because the regeneration of East London is, we are starting to see folk come into Barking and Dagenham for culture. This is a new thing for us. So it is something that we are really thinking about. And for us, it's along postcode lines, as I say, but I'm really open to seeing what other models might be. I tend to keep our prices low.
So to just chip in, are you saying like post-coup? Is that how you sort of define it? Is that how you all
Yeah,
about?
I mean, for now, yeah, we are looking at, if you're from Barking and Dagenham, you can have a ticket for this price type thing, and then anybody outside of that, we're going with that for now, just to see kind of what the response will be. But generally, what I try to do is keep our prices low, anyway, across the board, and then we'll do donations as well on the night. And what tends to happen then is no one's under any obligation, but folk who will donate. So, you know, we tend to get around it that way. But as Kathi was saying earlier, I feel really eggy about people paying for stuff anyway, particularly stuff that's been lottery funded. Because who plays the lottery? It's the, you know, people on the lowest incomes by and large. So that, you know, the poorest people in the country have paid a quid, and now I've got this money, and then I'm going to charge them to come and see a show. So it all feels a bit awkward, really. So we tend to do we tend to do add-ons. So the ticket price can be low, but then if you want something else on top, we tend to do add-ons that way. So there's no barrier then. But if you want more stuff, you can get more stuff discreetly, kind of thing. But it's really odd. It's really odd.
Add-ons, what?
So it might be a program, or it might be a glass of wine at the bar, or access to a, you know, post-show thing or whatever. I don't know. We'll sort of judge it based on what it is, but it's generally material things. But we've always got a slush funds available for people that can't afford stuff. We'd never turn anybody away who can't afford the ticket. We'll find a way to make it work. So no, I haven't got an answer really.
Do you have any thoughts, Kathi, on that?
Yeah, I think because we're getting to the point, I think Imagineers is looking at having to do another model, and probably will do it with combustion eventually, which is about charging. But for me, I'm still on the camp of exactly what you've just said, Liza. Poorest people in the world are then subsidising all the other people, and they've already paid for it. So there's a couple of things you can do. One is you can, if you've got your partners, so this thing going back again about looking at how you build capacity in communities, is engaging everybody in that building. So you look at some businesses there and you go, we've done this in the past, where there has been something that has had to be paid for. And we've got the business to buy 10 tickets. And then those 10 tickets are, go out to somebody, a connector in the community, who then gets, you know, brings some people so they have an experience. So, because a lot of it as well is about the self-worth that you're building up in somebody, you know, that they are, they're as worth as anybody else to go. So that paid ticket, you don't, you know, so that's happened. So if you're thinking about doing a show and you think you want to reach people, and then you have to charge and they can't afford it, how can you get somebody else to pay for it? And they feel they're doing something good. But also it's more than that. You want them to connect with that other group or organization. So then you're beginning to develop the relationship between that business and a local organization, and find out what else they can connect to. So there's that. You get somebody to pay for it. I think it's really, really tricksy in terms of the whole thing about pay what you can, because of that the other thing is then some people would not pay what. I think a lot of people are genuine, you know, but you are going to get a few who take advantage of that. But then, you know, that doesn't, as long as it's not seen, you know, you can have that. There was that whole age thing, wasn't there? If you're this age, you get certain tickets, blah, blah, blah. But what I'm going to do with, I'm in a situation with something that I'm developing at the minute. And because of the venue that it's, one of the venue that it's potentially going to be at, they need to have some kind of thing back from it. So it would be charging. I was trying to keep it at capped small level if we do have to charge. But then I'm thinking about creating another, the dress rehearsal or the or one of the performances where I send that out to everybody that's been connected or part of the project, so they see it for free.
Yeah.
So I don't think there's an ideal answer. It's and I think if we move out of subsidised, you know, when we become, I don't know if Arts Council eventually aren't funding the arts and that disappears, and then it's lottery and those other things, then we're in a dilemma, because it is that we'll end up with a narrow audience who can just, those who can afford to do, you know.
I'm exploring a thing at the minute. I'm just rewriting our sort of social value policy for the organisation. So less about kind of individual ticket buyers, but people that want to hire a space in my new building. I'm doing kind of dynamic pricing on that, right? So everybody that has any contact with my organisation going forward will have to demonstrate some sort of social commitment to Studio 3 Arts and to communities in Barking and Dagenham. So even if you are a West End company coming to hire my rehearsal room, you can have it at a reduced rate if you commit to your stage manager doing a talk for some local people, or you do a little an open rehearsal, whatever. So I'm kind of doing a couple of price points whereby there's a bit of quid pro quo type vibes, so that I can, make sure that everything that goes on in the building, even if it's just a commercial hire, there's a wider kind of social impact. So I think there's ways like that can be explored. And certainly we're doing that thing of asking businesses to sponsor a performance. So, you know, we for our Christmas show, for example, we're talking to businesses at the minute, say, we're only 115-seater theatre. So it doesn't cost that much actually to buy out an entire show. So we're exploring models like that, whereby there's always something in it for local people with everything we do.
Do you remember the old days where all the factories used to actually buy pantomimes for all the kids? That's how I went to a pantomime once at Coventry Theatre, because I think it was Chrysler at the time, or the Humber. All the big factories used to buy a performance for all the kids of the workers. So it's like, bartering, what you just talked about there as bartering. And then organisations like us who work, we have education, we have other projects, Monday Night Makers, all of this. We also build into our funding so that the authentic end outcome, that people can go to that, so that we can actually afford to take them to making sure that they're seeing work as well as being part of a project, so that they can go if they haven't got the option.
Yeah. I've sadly got to draw it to an end as we're coming up to the end of this session, and I could stay and talk for another hour and a half of at least on everything that you brought up today. And I'm also left wondering if there's a ticket system that you pay with lottery tickets that you've bought over the past however long. Throw that out to the ether. But just to say a massive thank you to both Liza and Kathi, who've been really inspiring and fabulous in your conversations today. So round of applause for you. Also big thanks to Lisa for being our tech guru today, and Erin and Gloria for being our BSL interpreters. You've been wonderful. Just a couple of things to sort of shout out about. So our next week's session, it's on physical impairments working in non-traditional spaces, and that's with Dan Edge, who is an actor and pro wrestler who just so happens to have cerebral palsy, as well as Fabularium, who do a lot of work in the city and beyond, in site-specific performances, and they're going to reflect a bit on what practical things they put in place to make sure that people can access those. So please do join that. We'll send out the links everywhere. We're having a little bit of ticketing issues with City of Culture at the moment, so we're just going to send out a forms link, and then we'll email you ourselves. And also to say, from City of Culture, they've put a little thing out where they've got on their websites, they've got a call out for small pockets of £1,000 for access to be integrated into events across Coventry across this year. So if you want to act upon some of the things that we've talked about today, or some of the things in the previous weeks, then there's a little seed fund of money which might be able to help you on that journey. Once again, thank you both, Kathi and Liza. You've been wonderful, and I want to get a beer with you, to have a reasonably priced beer in a reasonably priced venue to talk about this in much more detail, because it's been fascinating. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much. It's been brilliant.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. I've learned lots.
So have I.